Fractals are patterns that repeat themselves. These repetitive patterns are often found in nature. Think of a fern whose fronds are replications of each other. In the case of ferns, the individual fractals get smaller as they approach the tip. Fractals are self-similar across scale. Despite the differences in size, no two fronds are ever exactly alike. Fractals are found in different arrangements. Besides fern-like configurations, fractals can be seen in spiral patterns, bifurcation forms, and mirror images. The spiral patterns in roses, pineapples, pine cones, sunflowers, seashells, and galaxies are fractals. The fact that an individual fractal is related to an earlier such fractal is called iteration. The individual petals of a rose are arranged in a spiral design. Each petal is similar and in relation to the petal before it. Individual petals may vary in size, but they are never identical copies of each other. A fractal is both the part and the whole. The fractal is the petal, and it is the rose itself. The petal and the rose are joined together in a relationship of pattern and similarity. All the fractal petals are self-similar across scale. Bifurcated fractal patterns are abundant in nature. Trees are an example. They consist of repetitive bifurcation or branching. Lightning is another example of branching fractals, as well as rivers and our blood vessels. A mirror image that is reflected again and again is an example of a fractal. Each reflection is an iteration. This means that one image is the starting point for the next. There is a problem-solving approach used in business called systemical thinking. It is based on the fractal pattern concept. The idea is to look for similarities in a situation. The fact that fractals also appear in stories is interesting to me. In stories, fractals are used metaphorically. A good example of this is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The images in this story are repetitive and differ only in size and scale. I thought about fractals in my own life. Looking at some old pictures, I realized that my dance performances were metaphoric fractals. There are qualities inherent in dance in order for it to be considered a performance. A dance performance fractal is an art form that includes dancers, choreography, rhythmic sound, and the audience. Performances also often include costumes, settings, and lighting to enhance the experience of the audience. As fractals, they are self-similar across scale and time. A dance performance in psychological language is an archetype. My dance performances are metaphoric fractals, and in story language, the dance performances would be called the overarching motif or theme. All my performances had common elements. The performance commonalities never need to be identical. Thus, each fractal, each performance included the same characteristics. There was always a performance arena. I danced on stages, a hotel ballroom, large rooms at a nursing home and senior center, restaurants, and a dance celebration in a studio called a hafla. I always wore a costume. I wore a variety of footwear appropriate for each particular performance. At times I danced in bare feet. There was always music. There was always choreography that told a story. There was always an audience. And me as dancer. Fractals in the life of a human differ from those of a plant because time is more relevant than size. My dance performance fractals happened at different ages and different stages in my life. The performances occurred from early childhood to coming of age, into middle age, and then early cronehood. My physical size was a factor in the early performances. Later in life, it was time and age that became significant. Like fractals, the performances were self-similar. I was the dancer in the individual performances that all shared the same characteristics. Since each fractal reflected back to the one before, my experience of dance and performance was growing in complexity over time. As a 5-year-old first grader, I took the bus after school to the high school. There, the dance classes were held on the stage. I was barely 6 when I performed in my first dance recital. The recital was during the day, and I remember looking at my mother in the middle of the 3rd row. She was seated next to one of her good friends. There were 2 performances on the Ridgefield High School stage when I was 8 and then again at 9. On my way to the first class, I was praying that I would like the teacher. At the end of the first year of ballet, I was in a bluebird costume and a bluebird dance. Naturally, the costume was blue with a blue tulle skirt. My perfectionist mother always slaved over making my costumes. She wanted them to be perfect. The second year, I took both ballet and toe, called pointe. The dances were based on nursery rhymes. One was the story of Little Bo Peep, and the other was Jack and Jill. During the dance, we paired with a partner. I was one of the Jacks in the dance. I was a girly girl and was mortified to have to be the boy in the recital. It also bothered me that the teacher called me Jackie instead of Jane. There was a boy in my class at school named Jackie. My mother consoled me. She said that I probably reminded the teacher of a girl by that name, and it was okay. The coming-of-age performances began when I was in the 7th grade. I choreographed a dance, and my friend Ruth and I performed it for a school assembly. I was a doll and danced to The Waltz of the Flowers when Ruth wound me up. Later, I studied modern dance. My teacher's studio was a little schoolhouse on her property with a small stage. The dances she created were influenced by the famous dancer Martha Graham. Both years, the recitals were on the Fox Lane High School stage in Mount Kisco, New York. Because I was 14, and at an age when teenage girls are very interested in boys, the teacher choreographed a solo for me based on the Irish folk song, I Know My Love. I know my love by his way of talking. I know my love by his way of walking. I know my love by his suit of blue. And if my love leaves me, I don't know what I'll do. For bonny boys are few. Another memorable dance was to the music of Slaughter on 10th Avenue. The class danced as though we were crossing the street at a busy city intersection. We also performed the dance, and I danced my solo at a Lions Club dinner. My mother told me my father had tears in his eyes when I danced. My brothers were dragged along to most of my childhood and coming-of-age performances and sat with my parents in the audience. When I was a senior at Ursuline Academy in Dallas, the students put on a show for all the nuns. They were still wearing their habits at that time. My best friend and I choreographed a dance and made costumes. They were printed kimonos with big sleeves and obies, the wide belts that hold the kimono closed. Kathy's was yellow and mine was red. We wore white theatrical makeup and carried fans that we used in the dance. I smile now when I think of us as geisha girls dancing for the nuns. I was 17, a college freshman, and I was again in a modern dance class. My group performed for a Thanksgiving event. It was an improvisation, and the challenge of the dance was that we were restricted in the ways we could move. I carried away a life lesson from participating in that dance. It was that true freedom can only exist within structure. Otherwise, there is only chaos. I was what would be considered middle-aged when I began tap. I was interested in rhythm. I got the idea that tap dancing was great for learning rhythm. The women in the class ranged in age from their 30s to early 80s. There were 2 sections based on ability. I was in the beginner intermediate group. The several performances I danced in were on the Ridgefield East Ridge Middle School stage. My father was no longer with us. However, my supportive mother and my sister, Anne Marie, were always in the audience cheering me on. My belly dancing corresponded to entering cronehood. During that time, I performed twice on the WestCon stage. My sister-in-law, niece, and her little girl came to the performances. I danced for a tea at the senior center. I took a hula class, and we performed twice in a ballroom at the Ethan Allen Inn. I was sorry my dad was gone because he loved Hawaiian music. He would have gotten a kick out of seeing me dance the hula. Dad would have loved the pretty hula handstands. He particularly liked that song. Several of us danced twice at a Middle Eastern restaurant. I choreographed a solo that I also danced at the restaurant. And I performed it at a nursing home. The music was haunting. Parts of the Dona Dona lyrics are, "On a wagon bound for market, there's a calf with a mournful eye. High above him there's a swallow, winging swiftly through the sky." Later the words are, "Stop complaining," said the farmer. "Who told you a calf to be? Why don't you have wings to fly with, like the swallow so proud and free?" I danced this after my handicapped sister had been hospitalized for well over a solid year. She died shortly after this, my last performance. Fractals feed back on themselves. In psychological terms, this turning back suggests reflection. As I reflect on my dance experiences, I'm aware that there were universals for me in every performance. Each new dance performance reflected and fed back to the core of my dance performance experience. These universals were that every performance had definite emotional reactions for me. I was always mindful of the audience and that each dance was telling a story. I was also conscious that dance was relational. Like the iteration of a fractal, my experience of performance grew in complexity. Like fractals, the universals developed and deepened over scale and time. For me, there were emotional components associated with every performance. There was excitement and anticipation. As an 8- and 9-year-old, I was excited and giggled backstage with my friends. I was both thrilled and scared as I peeked from behind the curtain and looked out into the darkness of the audience. One year, when I was an adolescent, a rumor circulated backstage. Supposedly, there was a talent scout in the audience. This certainly added to the flutter of excitement backstage amongst a group of teenage girls. As an adult, I once again shared pre-performance anxiety with my fellow performers. To this day, I can recall the feelings associated with my dance performances. I felt nervous prior to going on stage and taking that first step. Then I became aware of the audience. This was always followed by exhilaration and the fun of performing. Once the performance was over and the high had worn off, there was always a bit of a letdown. I have been told that a story is for the listeners, not the storyteller. This is a concept that can apply to a dance performance as well. I knew from my first dance recital that the dance was for the audience. I was dancing for my mother. She was the audience for me. There is energy that comes from the audience. I learned that energy I gave out came back to me. A dance performance is a give and take of energy. There is something magical about the way it works. My reaction to audiences deepened over the years. As an adult, I appreciated those who attended. I imagine it took an effort for some of them to be there. In later years, I developed a deep appreciation for the sacredness of the idea of the audience as witness and the dancers as being witnessed. Dance is about stories. When I was 8, I was told to use my feet to tell beautiful stories. Certainly I was aware of dance telling a story, simply because 2 of my dances were about Jack and Jill and Little Bo Peep. When I was a little older, I wanted to tell a story about a doll that danced when it was wound up. So I choreographed this dance as a 7th grader. As a teenager, my understanding of dance as a vehicle for story deepened. This was particularly true of my solo. It was telling a story about a relationship with a boyfriend. One of the group dances was a story about life in a city. I became increasingly aware of projecting feeling to the audience. My understanding that dance communicates ideas through movement developed as I aged. The realization that dance is an expressive art form developed as well. I certainly was aware of dance being a non-verbal form of communication when I danced as a child. I realized it was more than just pantomiming the story. I remember being keenly aware of the fact that dance is a form of non-verbal communication by the time of my first modern dance performance. It was in conjunction with my solo that I realized what projection was, and that the essence of dance communication is expression and emotion. Dance is relational. As a member of a dance class, I got to know my classmates quite well. In most cases, they had become friends. Each dance required that we relate to one another and to the dance itself. I consistently experienced dance in relation to other dancers, the dance, and to the audience. It was these universals, my emotional experience of each performance, the audience, dance as story, and dance as relational, that are the basis of what made my dance performances fractals. Looking at the reflected fractal image, I see that the performances are telling a story about me as well. If I could see the smallest image emerging to the largest image, I would see that through the dance performances, I was growing closer to the self. The audiences were reflecting back to me. I was becoming my own audience through the spiritual connectedness to self and audience. The mature dancer sees herself and shows other people who she is through her dancing. I plan to have more dance performances to add to the fractal pattern. My intention is to dance in at least one show when I am in my 90s. Thank you.